Well, let's turn to the elections. Both political parties demand that we make the problem worse. In 2008, both party platforms devoted some space to how the government should address climate change. Today, in the Republican platform, the issue has essentially disappeared. But the platform does demand that Congress take quick action to prevent the Environmental Protection Agency from regulating greenhouse gases. So let's make sure to make it worse. And it also demands that we open the Alaska's Arctic refuge to drilling, I'm quoting now, in order to take advantage of all of our American God-given resources. You can't disobey God, after all. On environmental policy, the program says we must restore scientific integrity to our public research institutions and remove political incentives from publicly funded research. All of that's a code word for climate science. Stop funding climate science. Romney himself says there's no scientific consensus, so we should support more debate and investigation within the scientific community, but no action except to act to make the problems worse. Well, what about the Democrats? They concede that there's a problem and advocate that we should work toward an agreement to set emissions limits in unison with other emerging powers. But that's it, no action. And in fact, as Obama has emphasized, we have to work hard to gain what he calls 100 years of energy independence by exploiting domestic or Canadian resources, by fracking and other elaborate technologies. It doesn't ask what the world will look like in 100 years. So there are differences. The differences are basically about how enthusiastically the lemmings should march towards the cliff. Let's turn to the second major issue, nuclear war. It's also on the front pages daily, but in a way that would seem outlandish to some independent observer viewing what's going on Earth, and in fact does seem outlandish to a considerable majority of the countries of the world. The current threat, not for the first time, is in the Middle East, focusing on Iran. The general picture in the West is very clear. It's far too dangerous to allow Iran to reach what's called nuclear capability. That is, the capability enjoyed by many powers, dozens of them, to produce nuclear weapons if they decide to do so. As to whether they've decided, U.S. intelligence says it doesn't know. The International Atomic Energy Agency just produced its most recent report a couple of weeks ago, and it concludes, I'll quote it, "It cannot demonstrate the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities in Iran." That is, it can't demonstrate something which a condition that can't be satisfied. There's no way to demonstrate the absence of the work. That's convenient. Therefore, Iran must be denied the right to enrich uranium. That's guaranteed to every power that signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Well, that's the picture in the West. That's not the picture in the rest of the world. As you know, I'm sure, there was just a meeting of the non-aligned movement. That's a large majority of the countries in the world and representing most of the world's population, a meeting in Tehran. And once again, not for the first time, they issued a ringing declaration of support for Iran's right to enrich uranium, right that every country has that signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Pretty much the same is true in the Arab world. It's interesting. I'll return to that in a moment. There is a basic reason for the concern. It was expressed succinctly by General Lee Butler. He's the former head of the U.S. Strategic Command, which controls nuclear weapons and nuclear strategy. He wrote that it is dangerous in the extreme that in the cauldron of animosities that we call the Middle East, one nation should arm itself with nuclear weapons, which may inspire other nations to do so. General Butler, however, was not referring to Iran. He was referring to Israel, the country that ranks highest in European polls as the most dangerous country in the world, right above Iran, and not incidentally in the Arab world, where the public regard the United States as the second most dangerous country right after Israel. In the Arab world, Iran, though disliked, ranks far lower as a threat among the populations, that is, not the dictatorships. With regard to Iranian nuclear weapons, nobody wants them to have them, but in many polls, majorities, sometimes considerable majorities, have said that the region would be more secure if Iran had nuclear weapons to balance those of their major threats. Now, there's a lot of commentary in the Western media and journals about Arab attitudes towards Iran, and what you read commonly is that the Arabs want decisive action against Iran, which is true of the dictators. It's not true of the populations. But who cares about the populations, what are called disparagingly the Arab street? We don't care about them. That's a reflection of the extremely deep contempt for democracy among Western elites. I mean, so deep that it can't be perceived. It's just kind of like reflexive. The study of popular attitudes in the Arab world, and there is very extensive study by Western polling agencies, it reveals very quickly why the U.S. and its allies are so concerned about the threat of democracy and are doing what they can to prevent it. They certainly don't want attitudes like those I've just indicated to become policy, while, of course, issuing rousing statements about our passionate dedication to democracy. Those are relayed obediently by reporters and commentators. Well, unlike Iran, Israel refuses to allow inspections at all, refuses to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has hundreds of nuclear weapons, has advanced delivery systems. Also, it has a long record of violence and repression. It has annexed and settled conquered territories illegally, violation of Security Council orders, many acts of aggression, 5 times against Lebanon alone, no credible pretext. New York Times yesterday, you can read that the Golan Heights are disputed territory, Syrian Golan Heights. There is a UN Security Council resolution 497, which is unanimous, declaring Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights illegal and demanding that it be rescinded. And in fact, it's disputed only in Israel and in the New York Times, which in fact is reflecting actual U.S. policy, not formal U.S. policy. Iran has a record of aggression too. In the last several hundred years, it has invaded and conquered a couple of Arab islands. Now, that was under the Shah, the U.S.-imposed dictator with U.S. support. It's actually the only case in several hundred years. Meanwhile, the severe threats of attack continue. You've just been hearing them at the UN, from the United States, but particularly Israel. There is a reaction to this at the highest level in the United States. Leon Panetta, Secretary of Defense, he said that we don't want to attack Iran. We hope that Israel won't attack Iran, but Israel's a sovereign country and they have to make their own decisions about what they'll do. You might ask what the reaction would be if you reverse the cast of characters. And those of you who have antiquarian interests might remember that there's a document called the United Nations Charter, the foundation of modern international law, which bars the threat or use of force in international affairs. There are 2 rogue states, United States and Israel, which regard the the Charter and international law is just a boring irrelevance, so do what they like, and that's accepted. Well, these are not just words. There is an ongoing war. Includes terrorism, assassination of nuclear scientists, includes economic war, U.S. threats, not international ones, U.S. threats have cut Iran out of the international financial system.